No. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin tonight. We have a presentation by Wendy Bird, the Culture Coalition, on the use of ARP funds and next phase of grants, as she's going to outline their mission. Again, thank you, Wendy. The floor is yours.
I can hear you.
It's fine.
Just for the public.
Nope.
Now I can
Yeah,
hear you.
working.
You're good.
Thank you all. Thanks for letting me be on your agenda to give you an update on where we are with ARPA funding as of right now. We've been excited to do this work and happy to do this work, but I wanted to make sure that we are checking in with you all in terms of next steps, making sure that we have input along the way, and any course correction we have to make, we just need that input to help us kind of make sure that we're along the right path as we go through. So I have a presentation here. I did add in a couple of slides, so what you received in your packet, I think last week, it has a few additions in here, so it's not exactly the same, mostly the same. And then I also passed out to you all the summary of all the grantees from the first round, with a little bit more information about those that we've made public as well. So just as a reminder of kind of how we got here, this was just the budget. You all know all this. This is also our roadshow presentation, so we act like somebody has never heard this before. But just a reminder of from last July, August, we kind of got launched into the public arena. September, registration for people who wanted to be engaged with us in this work. We began having the roundtables in October for about 4 months that we did kind of online virtual roundtables to talk with the creative community about their needs and what they wanted to see this money be used for and how we could be helpful. We brought in Sarvani Hazra, our Norwich coordinator, in December. January through May, we worked on this grant program, a lot of outreach workshops and support, along with some other ideas. And then just obviously announced that first round of grants that last month. Just a reminder of the purpose of the $500,000 that you allocated for this. This was based on a 2015 strategic plan that we did in conjunction with NCDC and the creative community. These were the priorities identified back then, and we realized that they have not changed since that time, so we maintained what was the priorities back then and kind of have held true to these being the highest priorities for how funds could be invested. So where we are right now, of the $500,000, just so you know, we've spent just about $22,000 on the Norwich coordinator, who's been with us for almost 7 months now. Our administrative fees, a portion of that. I see Kevin is here with us tonight, so we've allocated $25,000 that he has, I believe, told you all about in terms of kind of supplementing a mini grants towards the NCDC grants. Ours are really for creative economy business expenses. I know Kevin has mentioned the use of public art, and public art falls underneath the bigger umbrella of creative economy. And creative economy expenses for a business that they're helping could be anything from architectural drawings to a graphic designer for a logo, maybe a photographer, a videographer for social media content, for promotion. So the umbrella of creative economy expenses is actually quite broad and includes public art as well, or artwork on the walls, but we have allocated that $25,000 to go there to help support kind of additional investment in the creative economy here in Norwich. We just awarded the first round of grants, so we're at $155,000 roughly, with just under $350,000 left to go. Just a little bit about the grants. We're going to be doing 2 rounds. We'll do the first one. We'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. The small grants were kind of to get ready for 2023, and the larger grants that'll be out this fall are intended to kind of help support activities in 2023, so the actual happenings. Grants have been available to all forms of creative economy businesses, nonprofits, for-profits, and individual artists. They are all businesses. And we made them available for basically all purposes: staffing, programs, activities, marketing, capacity building, professional development, marketing. Whatever their needs were, we wanted to be able to invest in those needs as they had them. So some of the round 1 data, this is our total applicant pool. So these are who applied for the first round of grants. We had 20 applications total, about $156,000, $157,000 in requests for programs and projects, and additional $14,000 for our cohort. Just to pause for a second, we worked, as you know, we did these grants for 3 cities: the town of Stonington, City of New London, and City of Norwich. We rolled all 3 out at the same time, each one with its own custom grant application, priorities, rubric, and everything else attached to it, but we did release them at the same time. One of the things we knew we wanted to do was to be able to help first-time applicants be able to apply for these grants and these funding. And as part of that, what we learned very quickly was that a lot of people needed a lot of help. So we actually went back to our peers in the region and the state and said, we think that there's an opportunity to provide professional development over the course of the year to our grantees to help them be able to access additional funding from someplace else, but also to help them just learn how to write grants better. And so we connected with our partners, so Connecticut Humanities, Office of the Arts, the Women's Business Development Council, and Assets for Artists out of Mass MoCA. And we offered kind of an unrestricted $1,000 if they opted in to be part of a one-year cohort that was just for all the grantees across 3 towns. And you'll see that a lot of them opted in for this, not just for the money, because they're going to have to use that money for their time to come and attend. But over the course of the year, we're going to be working with them to give them some basic business practices, some financial fundamentals, grant application support, and to really help them be better prepared moving forward so that your investment is obviously stewarded well in many ways, and hopefully they can reach out to getting more funding if it's available. But 70% of the applicants in Norwich wanted to have that professional development cohort, and 50% of the applicants here asked for support. So we offered support in 2 ways. One through Sarbani Hazra, who would offer just dedicated hand-holding technical support, questions and answers. And then we also offered all of our applicants across 3 towns access to our funding booster program manager. She's a professional grant writer that we offer to all of our partners for free. In the end, you'll see that between Sarbani and Jessica from our funding booster program, that is what made a key difference in applicants actually getting funded. They needed a lot of work in terms of budgets, basic business registration forms, filling out the actual application. We had a video portal. If they didn't have to write it, if they didn't want to write an answer, they could actually do a 2-minute video to answer the question. So we were helping them all along the way. But we definitely found that the need for, and I'm stressing this mostly because I want you to understand how much need there is for technical support on grant applications, and universally, in every town. But in Norwich and London, this was something that we really walked away from this process and said, we can do a better job helping applicants and first-time applicants apply for money and win that money. So a big takeaway for us. And we've talked with Kevin and a few other organizations here about how we can all talk more about this in the future moving on. We had a grant committee, scoring rubric, all sorts of, I think we didn't penalize anybody in their grant applications. We only gave extra points for those BIPOC applicants and for those applicants who demonstrated a greater financial hardship because of the pandemic. So there are only 2 things we added points for. So in terms of, here's just that noting of that technical support needed. Sarbani provided 50+ hours of free support and consultation to applicants, not just in outreach, but in talking about projects and programs and how much should the budget be and how much we should apply for and what can we do with this. And then our funding booster program manager did 25 hours plus free professional. And she actually read applications, gave constructive criticism, sent them back, worked with them on budgets, gave them templates, you name it, she did it. And so we found that this was a real key piece to the success of this program. So in the end, we funded 12 in this first round, 12 applications, 60% of them were funded, about $90,000 in programs and projects, $7,000 in that professional development cohort award, mostly from the nonprofits. 60% from nonprofits, or went to nonprofits, 25 to artists, 17 for-profits. About 60% opted in of your applicants, so 60% are taking part in the actual cohort. A little less than 20% of BIPOC applicants funded. And what for us was a kind of a little win, but 17% were first-time grant applicants, have never applied for a grant before in their life, and they won. 80% of the applicants that asked for and received technical support were funded. This number holds true across all 3 towns. 80% that asked for help and got support and asked, and received it and kind of took the advice, got funded in the end. And we did not, that funding booster program manager is not on the committee. So we didn't know what she was doing. We didn't know what she was telling them. She was separate from the process so that we wouldn't have any kind of awareness or kind of predisposition to them. 25% are using youth engaged funds, and then we give a little breakdown of where the funds are going to be going. Just as an additional information, so we funded, like I said, 12 applications, about $90,000 in program and project. 8 of those grants were for total project costs, 4 were partial project costs. So those additional 4 leverage another $75,000 in additional funds that will be invested. So a total, if you're investing $90,000, you're going to get back $165,000 in direct investment. Just, I gave this to you all on your paper. These are the actual grantees. The descriptions are on your desk in that packet, but just to give you a little bit in terms of the 12 of where that grant money went. You should know all of these, hopefully, these organizations and businesses. And what I would say is those that are having events, we'll let you know about them, and we hope you can attend their events or see what they're doing with it, and we want to make sure we keep you aware along the way. So I mentioned this before, these were the kind of specific barriers identified in this process that really those first-time grant applicants are not just have a lack of experience, but really hesitant to apply, really hesitant to share their financials, really hesitant to have somebody say, let me see your P&L, and they don't know if they need help with it, or if they're just embarrassed of the fact that it may not be as strong as they'd like it to be, or just culturally not wanting to share their financial information with anybody. And so even though we have carrots saying we want to give you money, there is a hesitancy to provide this much data to anybody. And I think, I will say this, I think it's helpful that we're an outside agency, that we are not the government. I think we would have not had the same applications if we were actually attached to the government, but because we're a neutral third party and a nonprofit, we have a little bit more, I think, less, we ask questions. Have you paid your tax bill? Do you have any citations? Do you have this? It's different. We had a few that have told us across the cities that they had not paid certain bills. They went right in, but they were less, I think, more likely to tell us that they hadn't paid something. They would probably be to tell you all directly that they hadn't paid something. So anyway, the learning curve for us. Eligibility requirements, current on taxes, like I said, financial statements. We just know that these are barriers to getting funding out. And then definitely some discussion that we've had why we brought the cohort in. Just some basic business practices. What you have, what has to be current, what a P&L looks like, what a budget looks like, what a good budget looks like in terms of understanding it, right? So definitely in terms of the barriers, these are things we want to work on. So that's the first round of funding, and our next step right now is to form this ad hoc public art committee so that we can dedicate some of the funds towards public art in the city. And so I know quite a few of you received my public art invitation for a committee. We are open to suggestions as to who else should be on this committee. And so just in terms of who we've identified so far that has either agreed or is in the process, but that's where we are right now. We'll work on adding in some professional artists and some artists. We wanted to make sure we include people who have a hand in approving public art in some way in the city. And I've said this, I think, before today. Norwich would benefit from an improved public art selection process and procedure. You have a process in place. I would not say that it is great, but it is your process. But you don't have any criteria for approval, right? So we want to think about content and approval and who's where should this land in the city, how should it be done, and what input do we need to do that. So I think we've touched on everybody who should be at the table in terms of not just leadership, but in terms of obviously Deanna, who's here, the city planner. We want to have Kevin thinking about where in the city things should go, the Historic District Commission, obviously the monuments, and I don't remember the whole name, but that committee. And all three of those members have agreed to serve, so thank you for all serving on that, because I know that's probably the most overlap. Anyway, so we're starting to form it. The purpose of that committee really is to identify policy and procedure. What needs, if we're going to have public art, how do we select the spot? How do we select an artist? How do we oversee it? How do we approve it? How does the community, and then how do we maintain it? And how do we sustain it? So that's the idea, is to kind of work quickly, and this isn't going to be from a vacuum. This is an area that I have a good amount of experience in, so we're going to give you kind of a little bit of template and say, what do we think of this? But the idea is, if we have proposals for art, then how are we going to make a decision that the city will ideally love and support the artwork that is selected for that place. Public art, as you know, is one of the most controversial things you can do in a city, right? You can make a lot of people really unhappy, or you can make them really unhappy. or both. And so we just are trying to find a way to not just think about content, but actually just process. What's equitable, what's accessible? Do you pay your artists for this work? What do we want to have as messaging in terms of what type of artwork that should be out there? Is there a theme? Is there a brand that you want to kind of put out there to the world of using public art to do that? So I'm excited to work with this committee. The idea being that these are some of the things we've talked about, kind of how this public art committee, and it's ad hoc, which means that when we expend all the ARPA dollars for public art that we have managed, you all can choose to adopt that process as a city or disregard it and go back to the way you do it now, but we're going to use a process that we think is best practices, and it's up to you all to decide if you want to maintain it or adjust it or go back to the way you had it. But some of the ideas really were, obviously the roundabout, and I just want to make this clear, we're getting a lot of great ideas for what should be on the roundabout, right? Everybody's got a great, but here's the thing, we know we're going to put out an RFP. So if you know somebody who says, I think we should put X, Y, or Z on the roundabout, tell them to go find an artist or a company who's going to be willing to put together a project and a project budget so that we can evaluate that and be able to realistically say if we want, and to look at the content and the design, and as a group, decide what we want there with some community input. But just telling us that you want, a big something there is not going to get us an RFP. We need an artist, we need a design, we need a budget for it. So just hopefully help spread the word that if they have ideas, talk to me, we'll help them, but they're going to have to end up having an application for that or a proposal for that. So some of the things we talked about, obviously the roundabout, Eastgate, as Kevin refers to it as the Eastgate, the public art down at the YMCA, the Majestic Rose, what does that entryway look like, and can we have an opportunity to talk about public art there? Both of those property owners are amenable to the idea of what they can do with their properties to put public art on there, so we've had discussions with them. And then obviously additional smaller public art sites and projects across the city. We've had 2 community input sessions where the community members have identified spaces in the city that they thought public art would help in terms of beautification, light, or even just adding value in a park. So we have some sites identified by the community that the committee then can look at and say, where's the highest and best value? Where should we put money, where should we put art first? So we will look at all of those as well. I mentioned here a partnership with NCDC. Obviously, like we talked about before, the grantee is getting the $25,000, about 1%. A storefront initiative that Kevin has not yet heard from me about this yet, but it's on there because I'm coming to Kevin with this concept from a few artists who have an idea about a storefront proposal using art. So our first place to go talk to would be to Kevin, which is great because he's around the corner from me in my office, and just to see if there's any opportunity for a storefront initiative using arts in some way. So it's become kind of a great clearinghouse for us. The Eastgate, like I just said, and then just as of recently, we'll be adding in kind of a layer of value around $250,000 as requested for public art into the application from the city for the Community Investment Fund. So we are working on that in partnership, obviously, with NCDC. So our next steps in terms of the fall, winter, we're going to begin this public art committee very soon. We have 1 mural that has been approved by our grant committee. The check is still in my office, but we are going to use that mural application in a project that was funded by us as kind of a pilot to see, this is what it is. We have an artist, we have a property owner who has a wall that he has said, I'm happy to have artwork on here. We have a project budget, it's been funded, it is shovel ready. We want to use that as a way for you all to say, how do we feel about giving an approval? What would that approval look like for that? So that'll be our first order of business. We'll do a second round of ARPA grants in the fall. Those are the bigger grants, the $25,000 to $30,000 grants. They require 3 entities, so collaboration is required amongst 3 entities. And we're kind of describing these now as they must be high impact. And high impact can be visitation, audience, social impact, community impact, event impact. You're going to be able to define, or the applicant can define what they think is high impact and tell us, but these are meant to be the big ones, right? So we want to see community-wide, big impact, big dollars to help them out. So we'll get going with that in the fall. Those will be for 2023 use. Those funds will be good for all of 2023 for the calendar year. We also, as I mentioned, you all knew from the Cultural District presentation that I gave previously, we're here kind of, not to be prescriptive about a cultural district, but when the city is ready, that, when you all are ready, if you want to, then we would kind of take you and talk to you more about what that next step is, and just know that the next step would be community input sessions from your community members to see if they have an interest in having a cultural district and where they think it might be. Should there be more than one? Should there be multiple? But you would want to get that buy-in first, and we co-facilitate those community input sessions, usually 3 in the city. We actually do the kind of facilitation, and you kind of co-host it with us as the presented by, co-hosted by the city and the Cultural Coalition, and then we facilitate the info session. What we gather out of those info sessions is kind of marching orders for the first group of commissioners for that cultural district. This is what we heard from the community, this is what they want, this is where they want it to be. But so we're kind of here saying, when you're ready, we're ready to go as well. As you saw, New London just got their official designation about a month ago now. We have 7 more in the pipeline across the state, 2 in eastern Connecticut. So we know that we're going to be probably quickly by the end of the year, probably up to a dozen in the state, which is what we wanted to see. So it's exciting. And I can give you the list of the districts that are the towns that are going after those. The other, just to put this on the table in terms of more of an exploration or just kind of an informational, that's what this is, right? Is that there is something called a Percent for Art program that takes place in cities and towns in over 350 of them across the United States. And the Percent for Art program is a way to build a public art collection that has policy and procedure, and it really is a commitment to saying public art or arts are very important to us, it's part of our values. And so we're asking, the public art usually is based on 1% of the budget. The state of Connecticut participates in a Percent for Art program. It's currently in moratorium because of a scandalous painting or something, I don't remember what it was, in New Haven that kind of derailed the whole project in New Haven. Not really fair to see that whole project and the whole program go down the wayside, but it has some support to bring it back because of the good work that it does do. But for the state's owned building, whenever they do any kind of a building, it's 1% of the budget. Now, different from the state programs are the city and town programs where there's an allocation of 1% of any a building that the city or town was building, so a library, anything that the city or town owns, you would have 1% of the budget be dedicated to art. Do an RFP, or you could pick up your own. But these are pretty standard in terms of how they work across the United States. There's some deviation, there's some customization, but in general, anything that the city or town does in terms of government buildings, transportation projects, sometimes streetscapes would dedicate a portion towards public art. And that can be lighting, outdoor sculpture, murals, tile on the wall, whatever you want it to be. And then there's the kind of companion piece to that in some cities and towns is the private version of that, which means any new developments or any redevelopments would also be required to put 1% of their budget into artwork in some way, shape, or form. It has to be accessible, publicly accessible, so it can't be in the office area of a building. It has to be in the community area of any building or outside. Some cities and towns have reduced it down to 0.25%. They just couldn't get the developers to commit to 1% when you're talking about multi-million-dollar projects, so they've gone down to 0.25%. If there's a new business that comes in town, say like a McDonald's that has a cookie cutter storefront that they do not want to add any kind of public art because it doesn't match their brand, they would be required to donate that into the public art fund in the city so that they could give it in lieu of, and then you'd have money to help maintain the other pieces of the public art collection. There's a lot more about Percent for Art programs, there's a lot more, and we don't have any in Eastern Connecticut, but it's something that I just want to make sure that you know that as we talk about all this public art, the need to be able to maintain it, sustain it, keep it fresh, is something we're going to want to really be thinking about. So that's where Percent for Art program could come into play. So I just want to make sure you know it. And then, as Kevin knows, when we talked about the roundabout, I was like, hey, you got a bunch more roundabouts coming. Wouldn't that be, what about the new one? So it's just the idea of asking, if you have a roundabout here with some artwork on it, is there any opportunity to actually add artwork on the new roundabouts coming on 82? And we did reach out to the state and a few of the people and asked, and we found out basically that it has to come from the community. The DOT would be potentially responsive, or in terms of if it's early enough, but really that it has to be driven by the community. The community has to want to have those spaces, have artwork on them, have somebody who's going to manage it, and then work with them. So just know that that's something that we're just floating out ideas of. If you're going to be talking about arts and culture across the city, can we think about linkages? Can we think about brand? Can we think about vision in terms of what message do we want to send? If it's a rose on everything, if it's whatever it may be, it's just the opportunity presents itself in a lot of places. So my last slide here, I said, like I said, please plan to attend the events or the organizations who receive grants. It's important that you all see where this money's going and seeing how it's being invested. We'll try to keep you updated as to what they are doing. My question was just, what do you want to do with the cultural district? I just want to, for my own planning purposes, because we've got 3 in the pipeline in other towns, my own planning purposes of my time allocation is, if there's a desire to go forward with continuing to explore a cultural district, when would that be? It's a good 6-month process, so I just want to have that on my calendar. I also, just put this in as of kind of today and over the weekend. We're at Boundary 66, so obviously all of us were impacted by the events of last week. I've been following everything on social media, talking to a lot of people, having the conversations about solutions and listening. We also try to stay a little bit above the fray in terms of we're not a hyper-local organization. We don't only serve Norwich, we serve 42 towns. So we're mindful of our place in the city as being regional, but at the same time dedicated and devoted to the city, but mindful that those who are here 24/7 really should be thinking about the solutions, and we're here to help that. So one of the things I did on Friday, actually, was I reached out to some of our funding partners and just simply said, if you all agreed that we wanted to put aside maybe $25,000 towards organizations that offer programs to youth or whatever age in the rest of the summer, we've got still 6 weeks of summer left, and if they have programs that they offer safe spaces for young people to go in and create art, express themselves, and do whatever, if they can only be able to afford a program that does 2 days a week for 8 kids, can we help you get to 16 kids 4 days a week? Can we do something in the fall? Is there a way to just scale up? So not new programs, existing programs and activities that just could be scaled up to allow more people to take advantage of them. So I did get some response from our funding partners saying, let's talk. They wanted to hear specifically from the youth empowerment groups who could talk about what the needs would be. So we're not here to be prescriptive and tell the city what it needs, but if there was an immediate need that could be identified and a solution that just needed money, which is often the case because these community meetings happen all the time after tragedies and nothing ever happens. So if money, which I think is usually part of the solution, if we can be helpful through arts programs, that's for you all to decide. It's your city's money. We're here to funnel it where you all think it should go with our own opinion. But I just put that out to you all. If you all think that you'd like us to do quick grants to organizations who can offer activities for the rest of the summer and possibly early months of the school week, we can try to get that out pretty quickly and just see if that's something that we can offer. If it's a need and it's verified by the community members that would be of use. And then my last question really is just, what do you envision to support this vision and plans that I've laid out? It's a lot. It's a lot. It's the most work we're doing in any city across Eastern Connecticut by far. But we're committed because this is the infrastructure building to really help the city down the road have a very strong arts, creative economy, arts that is sustainable, that is positive, that is making a difference, that is bringing dollars to the city, that is helping with all the economic development, the community development, but also the racial issues, the social justice issues, you name it. Arts can be a solution for all these things. So those were kind of my questions of, are we doing what we want to do in terms of these funds right now? So I will leave it at that and answer any questions that you may have.
Excuse me, thank you very much. Can you go back to the slide where it had the breakdown of awards and the private sector match, the percentage of what that represented in?
I didn't do a percentage, but I did dollars for you. This one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, 4 of the grant applications were a partial budget. I will say, so our grant program, just so you know, which is different in some ways and not unique in others, we did an all or nothing grant, which means that if you had a project and it was a $10,000 project, most funders will say, okay, I know you wanted $10,000, but I can only give you 3. So I'm going to give you 3, you got to go raise the other 7. One of the things that we've found as being a funder is that's really not helpful because then you don't know for 6 months if you get your response, and then you got to go raise the money, and you really don't know. And if all the funders are doing that, you can't stay on track with your timeline. It's really hard to piecemeal and cobble together the funding, and it just complicates. So all or nothing tends to be a new type of funding where they're saying, give us either the whole budget or the whole partial if you know how much the total, you have other funds secured, and we're just going to either give it to you or not give it to you. We're not going to get into a little, lesses or just a couple $1,000s. And that's kind of the norm. So that was different from ours. And so your grantees or your applicants were like, do we go for the whole maximum? Do we go for just a little bit? And we had a lot of conversation about what was the right amount for certain organizations, but the all or nothing was why you had 8 of the projects that were total program budgets, which means they had a project, they had an idea, this was the full budget for it, and if they got the grant, they could actually do it, which is what we wanted to see.
So the 74,000,
Yep,
does that
so-
reflect the partial projects that were funded and they brought in the
additional
private sector?
74,000, right. So their budgets were in total $74,000 more in those, only those 4 applications.
Okay.
They had additional funding to finish their project. And so they would, should they do their project, if they got ours, and hopefully the other ones as well, that would bring in another $75,000 in terms of funding.
But in all cases, the determination of sustainability is present.
Yes. Well, for these 4, so we'll have to go back and look at the sources in terms of that, but we'll find out pretty soon if they have that money to complete that project. So that would be a question for us to have with them, is if they didn't get the other grant or the other money. If I recall correctly, 3 of the applicants had the money kind of firmly in hand, right? They were not, this was not a shot in the dark. One of them, I think, was we're going to look for money from 3 places, we need a lot of money, and so we don't know the outcome yet. So if anybody hasn't secured the rest of their funding, we'll come back and let you know that they haven't been able to do the project because they didn't secure the rest of their funding. But as of right now, they've told us they're going to secure another $75,000 to complete those projects.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm done. Members, Alderman Wilson.
Thank you again. I mean, you always give us a presentation that truly highlights a bigger vision and direction for arts and culture. One of the things that, I think is a number that I'm looking at, I think it was the 17% of the BIPOC community that was awarded the grants, which for me is that's a huge number. And I know probably a large percentage of that were first-time grantees. One of the other things I think that, amazes me about this presentation is the detailing. So the detail of the areas of need with the individual organizations. So it goes, when you think of ARPA, it's beyond the recovery piece. This is the sustainability and elevation piece. So many of these organizations, once they've gone through this process, now have the skills necessary to do this, not only for this, but other places. My question for you would be, knowing some of the other pieces that we're envisioning, talking culture district, public art committee, which I'm in favor of both, how do we bridge that gap with these individuals and the technical support that they got, and knowing that that possibly could still be a need moving forward, to keep them sustainable and whole as far as making sure they have best practices?
Great question. It will always be a need. We certainly know that you will always have new people. You will have young people who are getting older, who are going to work for businesses or nonprofits, or going into their own place where they might need a grant. And it's not just a grant. Let me just be really clear. This applies to a loan application. This applies to COVID relief funds. I mean, Lord knows, I think we all heard and had to do a lot of hand-holding during COVID when people literally just had a hard time filling out, for for unemployment insurance. It was just, we were helping with everything. But trust was the biggest piece. If they didn't trust you and they didn't know you, they weren't going to get the hand-holding support they needed. But you will always have a need for the technical support, and it should always be available to businesses in the community. So I definitely stand by in terms of saying we need that. The bridge to cross is, I guess, we've thought about that. And one of the reasons why we are kind of tripling down here is because we know that we can be the bridge, but we have to help you build it, and then we need to back off. My organization cannot stay at this level in this city for 10 years. But we know that this is going to be a foundation for the city to really help it be independently sustainable in its own kind of realm around arts and culture. We know that that's what's lacking. We know that from when ARPA was, and I said this before, The Cultural Coalition has had to fill the void that we didn't even know existed pre-pandemic. Meaning very few municipalities have an arts department, cultural commission, anything. And so all of a sudden, many municipalities were saying, yes, we want to put money to arts and culture, but no, we don't have a system in place or infrastructure, so yes, you can do it, right? A third party. It's worked well, but that's not the business we're in. So if we can spend the next 2 years helping this city build a permanent, government-supported infrastructure that is filled by people in the community, we have done our job. So we will help you be the bridge. We can help you do all these things. We do them no matter what. If you want to do these or if you want to invest in us having extra paid staff to do it, it'd be a little different then, but we would still say yes. So we can be that bridge, but we'd have to know from your end that we're all working towards the same goal, which is that in the end, we hand it off, we back off, and the city takes it and owns it for the rest. That's it. And has some sort of a commitment towards funding that commitment. Because what we've learned and why we're kind of here is because we've always had the commitment and the desire to invest in arts and culture, but it has never been consistently done, year over year. And that's true for most cities and towns, just so you know, you're not unique. So we can be the bridge, but not a permanent bridge.
And that gets me to the next part of the question, you probably participated in yesterday's or understood the part of yesterday's emergency community chat that they had. And one of the things that I kind of brought up was this process probably helps making and building a directory of all of these individuals, both artists, nonprofits, and for-profit organizations that can empower this community in different ways. And so, again, getting into that bridge piece, that's the other realm to this of helping. The long-term solution is the sustainability from our city standpoint of providing a way for us to have everybody in one area. And that goes, of course, into the public art committee and all of those other things, but we're all playing in the same sandbox and knowing what one another's strengths are and where their collaborations are. So I think for me, that's another big piece because it's the other part where you're talking about with this bigger round of grant money that's not just an organization doing it. There's some partnership and collaboration needed. So I think that's the other big piece why I asked that question for that. Last question I will ask is, knowing all of this work that you have to do, do you see funding or additional funding needing to be a request? And if so, how?
A request from us, you mean?
Yes, to the city and.
Yeah, I think a second round would be certainly solidify the commitment in terms of you all tell us that yes, we want all of that, right? You want the whole menu. We would say we can help you do that. Should you not, and we don't put in a request, and we have been asked to put in a formal request, we could customize a request based on what you all think is really achievable. I mean, the public art program is a tough one, right? That's a tough one. That's one that even I can say, that's a la carte, it's on the side, it's not mandatory, it's not part of your main course, but boy, would it be like dessert, right, if you had a Present for Art program in the city, because you would really be funding and speaking volumes about the fact that arts are part of the values of this city. And I want to just mention, before I kind of full circle back to that answer, if you had a really strong arts and cultural community that had really the trust, the collaboration, working on all cylinders, everybody's going, you wouldn't just have arts supporting arts. You would have it talking with your social services department, with your health department, with your transportation, with Department of Public Works. The big cities who have invested arts are doing arts across and intersecting with almost every other department in City Hall. And so that's the benefit of having a well-oiled machine, is that all of a sudden when you start talking about when they were rolling out the vaccines and you had a lot of cultural hesitancy in communities, right? They brought in the artists to say, let me go talk to the Latinos, let me go talk to the different communities, let me go talk to and put this in a messaging form that will help them relieve some of the fear of getting a vaccine. But it was the artists that helped do that. So yes, we can, yes, money is always good to always pay us for this work. but we're willing to talk about what's really achievable for the city and what you all really want. We really don't want to be prescriptive in telling you you have to have these things, but what I will say is it would be devastating to do all this work and not have something permanent last at the end of this. That would be, for me, a failure. I'd like to see some permanent governance structure that is going to support this arts and cultural and creative economy of the city moving forward, with or without funding, but preferably with funding. And we can help you do that. Does that help?
Thank you, Holly. You yielded a form, Don. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Gould.
So I want to go to the sustainable, maintainable part of this, because while all of these things are wonderful and great and fantastic, 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road, when the statue doesn't look so nice anymore, the mural doesn't look good, you know, the cities have been criticized. So what are we doing right now to look at that sustainable, maintainable aspect that doesn't fall onto our Public Works Department that now has to, oh, we've done this beautiful project, but now you've got to keep going over there and maintaining it?
Great question, and something that the Public Art Committee is going to have to address within its first project, right? So that first mural that we're going to ask you all to approve by Faith Satterfield, it's in your pocket. We funded it, like I said, there's a wall, there's an artist, there's funds. We need to come up with our criteria in the Public Art Committee of what are we saying about this? Are we saying it's going to be there for 5 years, 10 years, and if we want it permanently, how are we going to take care of that mural moving forward? So that committee, the Public Art Committee, needs to start thinking of what are the possible options. In some cities, they would say, we're going to have this mural up, we're going to give it a 10-year lifespan, and we're going to change that mural like a billboard every 10 years and have a new artist and a new this, and we have a plan for it, right? And we're going to get funding for it that month. If you want it to be permanent, who's going to take care of it? Before it is approved, you know who was responsible for it, what the average maintenance cost would be to take care of it, and we have a plan for it. So that's part of the Public Art Committee's job. Right now, you have nothing in the city to talk about what you do with your artwork. You don't even have an inventory of all the public art. And you have a lot of public art statues, murals, monuments, you have all sorts of little electrical boxes with art on them that technically, in my mind, could be considered public art in some way, but you don't even have a list, right? So we don't even have an assessment. So part of the Public Art Committee's job is to sit there and say, do we want a list? Do we want to assess them? Who's going to assess the condition of the artwork in the city? Peacock Alley needs to be either renovated, restored, or gone away. But somebody needs to assess it and say it's in bad condition or it's in okay condition, it's got 3 more years. We need to have that as part of this process. So we can't do it retroactively. We can only do it moving forward and hopefully encompass a lot of the existing public artworks in that process. But absolutely critical to having a strong public art collection is making sure that it actually remains vibrant, right? Yeah. And not an eyesore.
All right, so at this time, anything that's being approved
Should have a plan.
does not have a plan? Or as a limited plan on anything that is being approved at this time? It's just,
So I can't speak for the city on what they've approved before.
well, I'm talking about anything that you're
Oh, what we're
involved with, what you're doing. I
Yeah,
can't,
yeah.
I
So-
can't go back
so-
10 years, but
yeah.
I'm talking about what's coming out of the gate now.
So we do not have that list in hand. That's the job of the committee, is to very quickly come up with a list of things we want to have to make sure that we approve artwork responsibly, right? So that is already on the list, and so we'll have to come up with the plan. So that piece of artwork that's been funded, we need to have a discussion about who's going to take care of it. It's the building owner, it's private property, right? Does the artist agree? Does she copyright that image? Is she the only one that can restore it? We have to ask some questions. So we'll have to figure this out. So in other words, TBD.
Sooner rather than later.
I think for all of our funding that we're responsible for, we will make sure that there is some sort of a plan in place. Once it goes outside ARPA dollars and we're not responsible for it, that's
Right,
for
no,
you
no,
all
I
to
understand
adopt
that, but I'm
the
talking about specifically what you are
Yes.
spearheading
We'll
at
have a
this
vision
time.
for it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It's a very long answer, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Other members? Alderman Singh.
I just have a quick comment. So I think I am in fully support of this commission, and I think we need something like that, so we do have a plan. Also, we have a community, like you said, art also reflects the community and community values. So it is important that we have those group of members who understand that when they evaluate any project. Because if you have people from different communities here, you're gonna see their faces in the artwork as well. So, we just have to get used to it, I guess. Because they're also part of the history because they live here now. So I think we should work on that committee if everybody is in support of that. But I am in support of creating some kind of system because we have a perception among people that when we go to government, answer is no. It shouldn't be that. Answer is yes. But we don't know how to proceed to that yes. So creating all these like areas where people feel welcome even to submit the project. Like you said, people were shying away even to filling up the paperwork for the grant. So we need to create that comfort level. And, thank you for giving us that kickstart because even after 2 years, when you won't be part of it, I think we should adopt that system as a city. So thank you.
You're welcome. And yes, part of our plan with this public art committee is to, kind of hand you, or hopefully it would be done through consensus with this large group. And I would say that the list we gave you of who would be on the committee is just meant to be a starting point. We know that there's going to be a who's missing, who else do we want, what else should be here. We want to make sure we're mindful that this is an evolving, at least at this point, as kind of a pilot project. But the other thing is to really think about, as we move forward with that committee, providing you back with, okay, this is what we found. This is the process for public art. They're going to submit it here. This person's going to approve it first. We've looked at this. Somebody's going to check off some boxes. But you really do want to have actual policy and procedure. And the policy is the bigger piece, right? The policy is, do we want it everywhere? Do we want it only in buildings? Do we want like some defining qualities around what artwork looks like in the city? And some of those pieces, to your point, we don't want to fund things or approve things that have not been, that we don't have any plan for. Like that's part of the policy, right? We don't approve it if there's no plan, or if there's no money to maintain it in 10 years, we can't approve it. Or we agree we're going to paint that wall white and start all over again. But that's part of the policy development. So I think we'll be able to hand you all the process and procedure that we're recommending, and we'll learn from it. You may learn from it further, but I think we can certainly get through with this round of funding. We can definitely, that's what we're planning on doing, is handing you a template of what we think is the best practice for this city in terms of public art. My only question before I know time is almost up was, I want to just circle back real quick to ask you your input on, do we want to carve out some immediate funding for some sort of response in terms of helpful response to community arts organizations through something like a quick grant program? Do you all feel like we can either carve it out and talk to the community, or we can keep doing our business and let the community organizations and the groups that have already kind of come together do that work? I just wanted to get some kind of the pulse to see if we want to do some set-asides here.
Alderman Singh, you all set?
Yeah, I think we should definitely go with next step.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Wilson?
So I would put it in the same boat. We sat up here, we gave opportunities to children for when it came to recreational programs, which are more geared towards sports, outdoor activities. And if we're trying to be inclusive and equitable to understanding not every kid is an outdoor kid and not every kid is a sports kid, but even then, with even the STEM programs and things that they have, that art is much bigger than just a paintbrush and paint. It's the lyrics and all of those things, but an opportunity for expression therapy and those things. If we can help our kids heal, but also expand new opportunities to them over the next 6 weeks, that will pop, or even beyond that. So I would say even looking at things in the fall, because we do have that gap, when some of those programming opportunities start. Anything we can do to get kids the opportunity to have a safe space, a safe place, and an expressive opportunity, I'm all for. And so I understand, we did it for recreational opportunities. It's only right that we would do it for arts.
Any other feedback on that?
Members? President Pro Tem, please.
Well, I don't have a concrete answer for what you just asked, but I will say this. First of all, thank you very much for all of this work, and your progress so far is remarkable and commendable. This council or any council or any department in this city would not have the ability to do this to the breadth and depth that you have. So I truly appreciate this. And I believe that this is an important initiative because cultural competency in a city, in a municipality, in a community goes beyond art. And I think that we're on that path towards competency, and we have a lot more work to do. And I appreciate the fact that you're shepherding us along the way. So I'm going to put your question kind of back to you. I know that you're working on, your second round of funding from the ARPA 1 money that we allocated. But ballpark, what request of ARPA 2 funding are we looking at if we want the whole menu?
I think you need to duplicate year one. I think genuinely we'd be able to put, that's if you wanted to continue with grant programs. So I keep in mind that the grant programs could certainly be one-offs from ARPA, that they addressed the need, they did what they needed to do, and they were one time only. I just would always want to see money going back into the community. So I'm going to say that if we were to do another round with the same dollar amount, we would do more of the capital improvement pieces in the public art community foundational government structure, but I'd still want to see $100,000 to $200,000 going back into the community for arts programs to help support what all these initiatives. So if you have great public art policy and a great public art process and no money to fund public art, well, we did all that work for nothing. So I'd want to see the money be the same, but then used differently. So we'd want to fund those, encourage requests for proposals, put more public art around the city, think about transportation initiatives. But at a minimum, though, without the grants, you wouldn't need to do the whole amount if you didn't want to grant back into the community. You asked me for a specific dollar amount. Yeah. Realistically, $300,000. And that's without grants going to the community. That would be all of this kind of work to get this city knowing that we weren't going to walk away without you all having a permanent government infrastructure. But I still say you need to throw in some of the extra money there as an investment to really show the community that you're not going to build something and not utilize that process.
Well, and then not be able to sustain it in the long term.
Realist and just kind of off the top, the part of that money should be used to fund a public art fund to deal with addressing murals and things that need to be, kind of restored right now or covered over. But I would actually seed a public art fund so that if you're going to put it there, we can say yes to more public art projects and have funding there to maintain and take care of them. So that would be a good use. So that would be not necessarily a grant to the community, but that's a grant back to the community. So we would carve out some of it for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other members? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time. I'll be back in a few months to give you more updates.